Today is the 50th anniversary of Earth Day.
The event began in 1970 to encourage people worldwide to think and act as stewards of the environment. Pope Francis celebrated the golden anniversary with a message of hope for the planet. And U2's Bono performed in front of the Colosseum in Rome. Earlier today, WCCO's meteorologist Mike Augustyniak spoke with Denis Hayes, who helped organize the first Earth Day. He says there is still good reason for optimism.
Denis, thanks so much for joining us today. Take me back to either the late 1960s or 1970 and sort of put me in your mindset. What inspired you guys to start the first Earth Day?
In 1970, and this is hard to remember 50 years later, the air in major American cities sort of resembled the air in Shenzhen or New Delhi or Mexico City today. Breathing the air in Gary or Pittsburgh or Los Angeles was like smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day. And that would have been true if you were a 6-month-old infant. You really shouldn't be smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day. Rivers caught on fire. The Cuyahoga in Cleveland caught on fire like 10 times. The Great Lakes were getting in increasing trouble. Rachel Carson had written Silent Spring about the disappearance of bird species. We had the Santa Barbara oil spill the previous year. And just in case after case after case, there grew to be a difference between the growth of our prosperity as measured by gross domestic product and a sense of well-being and healthiness in the public. So we wanted to call that to everyone's attention and demand that we start cleaning up our smokestacks.
What was that first Earth Day like? What were the celebrations like?
Well, the first Earth Day was probably at least as much protest as it was celebration. It had a lot of people in gas masks marching around power plants that were located in the middle of cities and polluting everything. And the biggest of the events was in New York City when John Lindsay, probably in part because he cared about the environment, but also in large part because he was jostling with Richard Nixon for the control of the Republican Party. Nixon was trying to, with his Southern strategy, make it much more conservative and sweep the South. Lindsay wanted to represent the progressive wing of the party. So he gave us Fifth Avenue. He shut down all the intersections for 50 blocks. So when I addressed a crowd in New York, climbed up onto the top of a platform that was maybe 5 stories tall, and there were people stretching out farther than I could see over the horizon. Some of the crowd estimates were on the order of 1 million people in that one location. And that was when I realized that it was really something extraordinary. In fact, the wire services at the end of the day tabbed up what they thought happened across the country and said that they thought more than 20 million people participated, which would have meant 1 out of every 10 Americans was doing something for Earth Day.
What over the past 50 years, if you had to list the top 3 or 5 accomplishments that Earth Day has inspired or directly created, what would you list among the accomplishments?
Well, I have it on pretty good authority that Richard Nixon decided to create the EPA with an executive order the afternoon of Earth Day when he saw the mobs out on the Mall in Washington, D.C. and the even larger crowds surrounding John Lindsay in New York. Second, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act, the Toxic Substances Control Act, that whole wave of legislation through the 70s has fundamentally restructured the way that America does business and much of the way that we lead our lives, made it vastly more healthy. Third, there has been a lot of environmental litigation where when Congress passes things, it often has a degree of ambiguity to it, and it's up to the courts to decide what this law really means. And the courts have done, especially in those early years, a wonderful job of taking something as vague as the National Environmental Policy Act and the need for environmental impact statements and clarify what they have to do. And then finally, I guess I'd say it's the impact upon people. In 1969, if you tried to conduct a poll on the environment, a few people would have known what you were talking about. There were bird people, there were anti-freeway people, there were oil spill people, there were air pollution people, but it wasn't all tied together as one movement. Now we have people who choose their vehicles for environmental reasons, choose their diets for environmental reasons, recycle for environmental reasons, even decide how many children we're going to have for environmental reasons. It has become a hugely important part of the lives of many people.
I'm curious to get your take on the state of the environment specifically today, April 22nd, given all the stay-at-home orders that COVID-19 has created. We've seen some changes to pollutants, for example, air pollutants. Does that give you hope? Is it something that you see as a blip on the radar? How would you characterize it?
Well, both. It gives me hope because a lot of people, young people, even 30-year-old people who have never seen the mountains around their home cities now are recognizing that some of them live in gorgeous places that they had no knowledge of. These responses, though, to emergencies, to a 9/11, if it has an institutional response, security cameras every place, screening in federal buildings, screening at airports, that stuff, once it's put in, tends to endure. Behavioral changes that are voluntary only stick around if the people that are doing it find that they are better off and happier having made the change than they were before. And I think maybe, if I'm going to be on my optimistic side, many people like myself who do work that can be done at home as well as in an office. It doesn't apply to hospital workers or firemen or something, but those of us who can and are able to avoid a commute into work and the congestion and the aggravation and the pollution and the energy consumption will, I think, be leaning on their employers to let an increasing fraction of them work at home, say 1 day a week. That would be reducing 20% of the commuters, 20% of the pollution, 20% of the energy consumption. Ultimately, we'd need 20% less office space that then needs to be using energy to heat and to cool and to light. So that sort of thing could be a change. It's certainly no solution, but it's something that gives people some progress.
Denis, thank you so much for your time today. Congratulations on what you built, and thank you for leading the way on all things environment.